Hello, welcome to another episode of Spanish Media Diaries, where I talk about the things that I have been consuming that are natively made in Spanish. Today we will start with books. I don't have any of these books physically with me because I just moved. So the first one is Patria by Fernando Aramburu. And this is quite a long book and has also been made into a TV show on HBO Max. I started to watch the show, but to be honest, it is, based on what I watched, almost identical to the book. So I actually just kind of fizzled out on watching it because there was nothing to keep me engaged. This is about two families who are involved in the Basque independence movement in different ways. So one of the couples, the father is a businessman and he is actually killed by ETA, the armed forces of the Basque independence movement, because he doesn't comply sufficiently basically with their financial demands. He has adult children and everything, and the other family also in that town, the son is suspected of being the murderer and ends up going to prison. Some years later, ETA announces a ceasefire, and so the widow moves back to the town. And so this book is a very, very sweeping story. There's a bunch of different timelines. There's a ton of different characters. So at times it was, a lot to keep track of, but it was extremely interesting. I like those kind of like multi-generational sweeping stories. Unfortunately, I didn't feel like this one provided as much as it could have in the realm of the Basque conflict. Obviously, this was written, in Spanish, published in Spain, so most people would have a lot more of that background, so I'm not sure if that's why it wasn't really included, or if he was trying to kind of universalize this experience. But I know some about the struggle for independence, but not much. And so without that kind of context, this read as quite, I would say, more aligned with the Spanish. And that's not to say that that's bad or anything, but, telling this story of this murder and not really including any background on the independence movement or the struggles that led to that movement does lead it to feel quite anti-Basque independence, that maybe that's exactly what he intended. But, ultimately it felt a little bit shallow to me. Anyway, I'm glad that I read it, but I didn't find it like life-changing or anything like that. Then I read El Invencible Verano de Liliana by Cristina Rivera Garza. This is a memoir nonfiction book about the murder of the author's sister in Mexico when she was 20, I think. She was murdered by her ex-boyfriend, and the boyfriend was never found, never arrested, nothing legally came of this, and so the author is revisiting this case like 20 years later, trying to shed additional light on what happened, going through all of her sister's journals, papers, documents, talking to her friends, just really like unwinding what happened and getting the legal files and everything. Nothing like happens as far as I know about the case, but just kind of shedding light on the issue of femicide in Mexico and around the world, and domestic abuse, the red flags that exist. Obviously an incredibly difficult, heartbreaking book to read. This was incredibly anxiety inducing for me to read. That doesn't mean that I shouldn't have read it or anything, but just definitely something to be aware of that, if you are, this is a subject that worries you, this is obviously going to be super worrying. But I was glad to have been able to, meet her sister, who just seems like such a just bright light of a human. And I'm gonna cry now. It's just so, so important for her to be known that this, didn't blot out her existence. And obviously, hopefully, for it to be something that prevents future atrocities like this. So anyway, if you can handle it, it is a great book. Then I read La Mala Costumbre by Alana Portero, I think. This was the book club book for my Patreon for August. Or was it July? I can't remember. I read it really late. I do know that. This was a very, very beautiful book. This is a fictional book kind of in the style of a memoir, though. Like, it reads like a memoir, in my opinion. This is telling the story of a trans girl growing up in Madrid in like the 70s and 80s, I think. The vast majority of the book, she is closeted, kind of experimenting a little bit, but very, very much not out, not living as a woman. And so obviously that comes with a lot of conflict between the inner life and the outer life. This was very, very flowery, I guess you could say, not in a bad way, but just very artistically written. So I did find it quite difficult to focus on. It was something, it's very slow paced, very just thoughtful, contemplative. So I really enjoyed it while I was reading it, but I was never like anxious to pick it up, and read it. But I always, enjoyed my time reading it, even though obviously it is very heavy and sad as well. But I thought that it really came around nicely at the end and centered around the community of trans women supporting each other. And it was a really, really nice book. It's not that long. I would recommend it. Then just a little tiny one, Noche Antigua, is a picture book, which was the Spanish book club book for October. And obviously it's a picture book, so it did not take me super long to read. So this is like a well-known illustrator apparently, and the pictures are stunning. The story is a interpretation of different indigenous myths in Mexico. And so it was a really, really endearing, sweet, beautiful book. Not too much to say, obviously, but I would definitely check it out. And if you have kids, obviously, it's a great opportunity to read them something different. Shows. So I watched the show Land of Women on, I think, Apple TV. This is a Eva Longoria show, I think. And so it is, Apple TV does a lot of these kind of mixed, well, not a lot, I'm not going to say a lot, but I've seen multiple of these kind of mixed language shows on Apple TV. They have people speak the language that it kind of makes sense for them to speak in the show, which I think is nice and kind of refreshing. So in this one, the main character she does speak it in the show when she needs to, but she's clearly more comfortable in English. Her daughter and her mother speak almost entirely Spanish. It was just such an interesting ensemble cast. So the daughter is actually an actor from Mexico, and so they basically slightly rewrote the show, from what I can understand, specifically to cast this girl in the show because they loved her so much. So they justify her having a Mexican accent in English by saying that they spent most of her childhood in Mexico, so that's why she speaks better Spanish than her mother does, and her mother's mother is from Spain. And so most of this show takes place in Spain because Eva Longoria's husband, they discover that he's doing some bizarre financial things, and so they have to basically be on the run. So they go to the grandmother's village in Spain, and so things unfold from there. It was a really endearing show. It was really, really cute. I'll keep watching it if they make more seasons of it. The first season did end incredibly abruptly. Like, I didn't even realize it was the last episode. We tried to like go to the next episode and it was like, oh, that was the end of the season. What? So I do hope that they make other seasons of it just so that you can get a little bit more development, but who knows. Then I watched Guante Blanco on RTVE Play. This is a Spanish show that it's one of those shows where the episodes are like an hour and a half long or something like that. So I don't love that aspect of Spanish TV, but this one was cute. Like, it was interesting. If you like kind of older school detective-y kind of shows, like not as old-fashioned as like Perry Mason, but like the middle ground between like Monk and Perry Mason, you know, detective versus con artist kind of thing. So you're following a group of professional thieves and you're following the detective who's trying to capture them, and they're kind of like high-end art thieves and that sort of thing. And so they do these very precise jobs. It was interesting. It was an easy watch. Not anything to absolutely write home about, but it was a really good one to put on where it didn't require full brain power, but it also wasn't like a complete throwaway watch, you know? Then I watched the show Traitors from Spain. So this is a reality show that they've made seasons of it for many different countries. My sister loved it in a bunch of different countries, and so I saw that they made one for Spain. And so I watched it. It was on HBO. I really like the concept of this show. So if you've ever played the game Mafia, where you like get cards, and if you have like a specific card, you are Mafia and you're trying to like, you know, kill your fellow people without anybody knowing it. Same with like the game with the little creatures that everybody played during the pandemic. So this is like a reality show in which you're doing challenges every day, but then at the end of the day you are like trying to vote out a person who you think is a traitor, and then the traitors get to kill a person off the show. Either the traitors get money or the innocent people get money. So I love the concept of the show. I think it's really fun, you know, idea. The actual challenges for each episode I did not find interesting at all. So I tended to kind of do something else or zone out while the challenges were happening. And then I would like mentally tune back in for the voting people off or deciding who was going to get kicked off the show or like, you know, get killed at the end of the episode. Like, that was the only part that was really interesting to me. But they do have like, you know, the little interview boxes where people talk about it outside of the show. So like those were interesting. You know, it was fine. It's kind of more of the type of reality show that I'm generally interested in than the dating ones. So it was good to experience that. It does have a little bit more authentic accents than the sterilized acting shows usually do. So it was fine. Then I watched Las Azules, which I think is also on Apple TV. This is a Mexican-Spanish show about the first like squad of female police officers in Mexico City in like the 80s maybe. And there's a serial killer active in Mexico City at the time, and nobody's necessarily getting very far in catching him, and so they really want to be involved in that, but obviously they're really not being taken seriously as cops. And so this was really endearing. I really, really liked so many of the characters on this show. I do think it seemed like they were setting it up for a second season, so I am looking forward to that. Then the only other thing that I have for this episode are a couple podcasts. So there's two really long form podcasts that are part of the Documentales Sonoros kind of line. So one is just Documentales Sonoros. So these are just documentaries, but audio about many different subjects. The kind of like selling point of this is like you are a person who enjoys documentaries but you don't have time to sit and watch them, so this is the good alternative. And then there's a, like, I don't know if it's a spinoff or whatever, but called Laberinto Criminal, and this is just the crime subcategory of these. So I have found both of these super interesting to listen to. I've listened to a couple of each one. Then I listened to, I started this show because I have HBO Max because my internet in the US, it was included in my internet, like included. I'm sure I paid for it, but, and so I was like, well, I need to use this before I lose it. Like, so I was trying to watch everything that I could that I was interested in on HBO. So when I got to Spain, there was a docu-series about the Sancho case, which is relatively kind of a big thing on Spanish news because it involves the son of a famous Spanish actor that I've seen in a bunch of stuff. He's in El Ministerio del Tiempo and all kinds of stuff. So his son murdered someone in Thailand, and the trial was happening this summer, and he was given life in prison. There was a possibility of the death penalty, so that's part of why it was such big news, but he wasn't given the death penalty. He was given life in prison. So I saw this docu-series and I was like, oh, I want to watch that because I had no idea what had happened. All I knew was that someone had killed someone and that it was a big thing on the news. The series on HBO, probably half an hour of the first episode was just them interviewing the actor, basically about how difficult this was for his family. And I was like, this is not journalism. What are you doing? So I gave up on that series and I started trying to find other things that talked about it just to get the story. And it was surprisingly difficult to find things that just told the story and didn't sensationalize the actor part of it. So anyway, there's a mini series podcast called Los Vestigios del Caso Sancho. It's not amazing. It doesn't go really super in depth or anything, but it was good to get the baseline story. I think it was 3 or 4 episodes. It was informative, and I didn't feel like it was as sensationalized as most of the other stuff. So that is what I have right now. I am excited to be here in Spain and be able to go, see movies in the theater and stuff. And obviously I've already been browsing bookstores. It's great for getting ideas of books to read and all kinds of other good sources, obviously, of just seeing what is popular here. So hopefully the next round of this will be even more interesting and informative. But let me know what you have been reading, watching, listening to, etc. And I will see you in the next video.